He wasn't born into wealth, and he didn't inherit an empire. But by the end of his life, he had become the richest man in modern history. This is the story of John D. Rockefeller, a boy from a troubled home who built a business that changed the world. From small beginnings in a struggling family to founding Standard Oil and reshaping capitalism itself, his journey was anything but ordinary. He worked with quiet discipline, ruthless precision, and an unwavering belief in long-term thinking. But behind the numbers, the headlines, and the fortune lies a more human story. A story of ambition, faith, and a surprising turn toward generosity. You've heard of his wealth. Now discover where it came from and what he chose to do with it. John Davison Rockefeller was born on July 8, 1839, in Richford, New York, a quiet farming town tucked into the green hills of the American Northeast. His entry into the world was not marked by wealth, security, or great promise. His family lived simply and moved often, following opportunity wherever it led them, even if the road was uncertain and the future unclear. His father, William Avery Rockefeller, known by many as Big Bill, was a traveling salesman who sold elixirs and potions, many of which promised more than they delivered. He claimed to be a doctor, though he had no degree or training and often disappeared for weeks, leaving the family behind. Big Bill was both charming and deceptive, a man who taught John that the world could be unpredictable and that trust was something earned, not given. John's mother, Eliza, was the complete opposite. She was a woman of deep religious faith, quiet strength, and tireless discipline. She managed the household while her husband was away, teaching her children the value of hard work, thrift, and prayer. It was Eliza who gave young John his first lessons in saving and accounting. Even when money was tight, she made sure the children learned the importance of responsibility and honest effort. She taught John to keep track of every penny, and from a young age, he kept records of even the smallest amounts he earned. By the time John was just a boy, he was already learning the habits that would later define him: discipline, order, and quiet determination. He didn't speak often, but when he did, it was with careful thought and clear intention. He was not the kind of child who dreamed loudly or chased wild ideas. He watched, he calculated, and he planned. The family's financial situation was unstable, and John quickly understood that money brought security. He began earning on his own by selling small items like candy, potatoes, and even turkeys to neighbors. Every coin he earned was counted, recorded, and often saved rather than spent, which gave him a growing sense of independence and control. At the age of 14, the Rockefellers moved to Cleveland, Ohio. It was a growing city, filled with opportunity for those who were willing to work. John finished his schooling there and attended a short business course at a local commercial college, learning practical skills like bookkeeping, penmanship, and business arithmetic. He loved numbers and records. Unlike many of his classmates who wanted to be lawyers, doctors, or politicians, John wanted to work in business, quietly, steadily, and without fanfare. At 16, he got his first real job as an assistant bookkeeper at a produce commission firm. He showed up early, stayed late, and performed every task with precision. His employers noticed his maturity and reliability. He was not the fastest worker, but he made the fewest mistakes. What impressed people most was his consistency. He didn't seek attention or compete with others. He simply outlasted them. He once said, "Do not many of us who fail to achieve big things fail because we lack concentration. The art of concentrating the mind on the thing to be done at the proper time, and to the exclusion of everything else." This focus, which he developed even as a teenager, would serve him for the rest of his life. He soon earned a small raise and began setting aside savings with almost religious discipline. By age 20, he had saved enough money to start his own business. In 1859, with a partner named Morris Clark, Rockefeller started a commission business, buying and selling grain, meat, and other supplies. The two pooled together $4,000 to launch their firm. Their office was modest, their tools were basic, and their strategy was simple: be honest, work hard, and always reinvest profits into the business. While other young men his age were chasing wealth through speculation and gambling, Rockefeller focused on long-term growth. He avoided debt, negotiated carefully, and always demanded value. This cautious, methodical approach made his business stand out. When the American Civil War broke out in 1861, many businesses struggled. Supplies became scarce, prices jumped, and shipping became dangerous. But Rockefeller saw opportunity. He used his bookkeeping skills to analyze risk and manage contracts with military suppliers. His firm made solid profits by supplying food and materials to the Union Army. This period taught him a valuable lesson. Money could still be made during uncertain times if you were smart and careful. Yet even then, Rockefeller was looking beyond grain and pork. He had begun to notice a strange new industry growing near the town of Titusville, Pennsylvania. There, black crude oil was being pumped from the ground and sold for lighting fuel, lubricants, and medicine. Most people rushed to the oil fields, trying to strike it rich by drilling. But Rockefeller was not interested in the chaos of oil exploration. He studied the industry from a distance and realized something important. More money could be made in refining oil than in drilling for it. Refining was safer, more stable, and less dependent on luck. It was about control, not chance. Rockefeller had already made a name for himself in business, but he saw in oil the chance to build something far greater. Still in his early 20s, he began investing in small refineries around Cleveland. He watched everything: production, costs, quality. He cut waste, streamlined operations, and focused on efficiency in a way that most others didn't even understand yet. John D. Rockefeller wasn't born into power or privilege. He didn't come from a line of politicians or industrialists. He came from a troubled home, worked hard, studied constantly, and learned to think for the long term. The habits he formed as a child, writing down every expense, saving every cent, analyzing every risk, became the tools he used to build an empire. And unlike many others in business, he didn't care about fame or public praise. He was building something lasting, brick by brick, number by number. The world hadn't yet noticed, but soon it would. And when it did, John D. Rockefeller would never be forgotten. In the early 1860s, the oil industry was booming but completely disorganized. Wells were scattered across Pennsylvania, and many were owned by men with more dreams than discipline. They rushed into the business with little planning and even less understanding of economics. Fortunes were made and lost overnight. Crude oil itself was useless unless it was refined. It needed to be processed into kerosene before it could be sold for lighting and heat. The refining process was messy, dangerous, and full of waste. Most refiners lost money due to poor efficiency and unpredictable prices. But to Rockefeller, it looked like a puzzle that needed solving. He believed the oil business could be transformed into something more stable, scientific, and profitable. In 1863, he partnered with chemist Samuel Andrews to start his first refinery in Cleveland. Andrews understood the chemistry, and Rockefeller brought business discipline. They combined precision with vision and quickly outperformed their competitors. By the time other refiners were still guessing at prices, Rockefeller knew his exact costs down to the penny. He streamlined transportation, reduced waste, and reinvested profits into better equipment. He never wasted a drop of oil or a minute of time. He once said, "I would rather be accused of breaking precedents than breaking promises." That philosophy made Standard Oil different from the beginning. He kept his word, honored contracts, and built relationships that lasted. But Rockefeller's real breakthrough came from how he viewed the oil business as a whole. He didn't want to be just another refiner. He wanted to control the entire supply chain. That meant owning the barrels, the warehouses, the railroads, and eventually, the pipelines. He understood that profits could be found in every step of the process, not just at the end. The more pieces he controlled, the more stable his company became. This strategy was called horizontal integration, and Rockefeller mastered it. He began buying out other refineries, quietly, patiently, and often at a bargain. Many of these operations were inefficient and barely profitable. Rockefeller would offer them fair prices, sometimes even higher than expected, and then absorb their assets into his growing empire. By 1870, he formally created the Standard Oil Company. At first, it was one company among many, but that wouldn't last for long. His team focused on consistency, quality, and above all, control. He made secret deals with railroads to ship his oil at lower rates. In return, He guaranteed them high volume and dependable business. This allowed him to undercut his rivals' prices while still turning a profit. Some called these practices unfair. Others called them brilliant. But Rockefeller didn't break laws because there were no laws regulating this kind of corporate power yet. His goal wasn't to destroy competitors for sport. It was to bring order to a chaotic industry. Still, the effect was the same. His competition disappeared, one by one. By the late 1870s, Standard Oil controlled the majority of refining capacity in the United States. In some cities, they held more than 90% of the market. The name Standard meant something. It stood for predictable quality, trusted supply, and unbeatable efficiency. Inside the company, Rockefeller enforced a culture of discipline. Meetings started on time, finances were exact, and decisions were made based on data, not emotion. He paid close attention to details, even as his empire expanded. He believed in paying employees fairly but expected full commitment in return. Mistakes were corrected, not punished, but rarely repeated. His leadership was quiet, firm, and deeply respected. He didn't give speeches or chase headlines. He built behind the scenes, out of sight, with a small circle of trusted advisors. To outsiders, he appeared secretive, even cold. But within the company, he was known for his calm presence and unshakable patience. He rarely raised his voice, and he never acted in haste. He made decisions slowly and then never looked back. As Standard Oil grew, so did public attention. Newspapers began writing about the company's growing dominance. Some admired it, others feared it. The word monopoly started to appear in editorials and political speeches. People asked how one man could have so much power over something as essential as energy. Rockefeller did not respond publicly. He believed the results spoke for themselves. Prices were lower, supply was stable, and thousands of jobs had been created. But not everyone saw it that way. Independent refiners accused him of using unfair tactics. Politicians debated whether the government should step in. Still, Standard Oil kept growing. It expanded into lubricants, chemicals, and later gasoline. Its pipelines stretched across states, and its warehouses lined railroads. It became not just a company, but a system. By the 1880s, Rockefeller was no longer just a businessman. He was a force in the American economy, and yet, despite his wealth and influence, he remained quiet, cautious, and rarely photographed. He didn't live in a palace or throw extravagant parties. He attended church, donated quietly to charities, and taught Sunday school. His lifestyle remained surprisingly modest. People were confused. How could the richest man in America seem so ordinary? But Rockefeller didn't want to be a king. He wanted to build something permanent. The more success he found, the more carefully he moved. He began planning for the future, not just of Standard Oil, but of his family and his legacy. Because for Rockefeller, success was never about the moment. It was about what came next. As the 1880s turned into the 1890s, Standard Oil had become one of the most powerful companies the world had ever seen. It refined, transported, and sold the vast majority of oil in the United States, and much of the rest of the world as well. Its influence reached into railroads, banks, shipping ports, and even politics. Rockefeller had done what few thought possible. He had tamed an unpredictable industry and turned it into a model of precision. But as his empire grew, so did the opposition. Competitors, journalists, and politicians all began calling for reform. They argued that Standard Oil had too much control, that it bullied smaller companies, and that it stifled innovation. The company's secretive nature only fueled suspicion. People didn't understand how it worked. They only knew it seemed unstoppable. Into this growing tension stepped a young journalist named Ida Tarbell. Her father had once owned an oil business ruined by Standard Oil's expansion. She decided to investigate the company and uncover the truth behind its rise. Tarbell spent years researching Rockefeller's empire. She interviewed former employees, studied court records, and traced financial connections. In 1902, she published a detailed exposé in McClure's magazine that captured the nation's attention. Her work was methodical and well-documented. She didn't attack Rockefeller personally. Instead, she exposed the structure of Standard Oil piece by piece. The articles described secret railroad deals, predatory pricing, and manipulative business strategies. public opinion began to turn sharply. What had once been admired as a model of success now looked to many like a threat to fair competition. The federal government took notice. By 1906, the U.S. government filed a formal antitrust lawsuit against Standard Oil under the Sherman Antitrust Act. It argued that the company had become an illegal monopoly that hurt both competition and consumers. The case moved slowly through the courts, gathering evidence and building momentum. Rockefeller, now retired from active management, did not appear in court, but his influence was still felt everywhere in the company's operations. Behind closed doors, he followed every development closely. In 1911, the U.S. Supreme Court reached its final decision. It ruled that Standard Oil must be broken up into smaller, independent companies. The court concluded that the company's structure and practices had violated federal law. At first glance, it looked like a defeat. Standard Oil would no longer exist as one powerful entity. But the truth was more complicated. When the company was broken up, its shareholders, including Rockefeller, were given shares in the newly created companies. These included future giants like Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and others. Ironically, the breakup made Rockefeller even richer. His wealth skyrocketed, and his position as the richest man in America became undeniable. By some estimates, his fortune reached the equivalent of over $400 in today's money. He was now not only the most powerful businessman in history, but also its wealthiest. Despite his immense fortune, Rockefeller had already begun a quiet transformation. He stepped away from the business world and turned his attention to something else entirely: philanthropy. He believed that his money should serve a greater purpose. He once said, "I believe the power to make money is a gift from God, and I believe it is my duty to use that money for the good of my fellow man." This belief guided his next chapter. He began giving away his wealth with the same care and planning he had once used to build it. Rockefeller didn't just write checks, he built institutions. He funded universities, public health programs, medical research centers, and schools. He helped eradicate diseases like hookworm and yellow fever, especially in the American South. He created the University of Chicago, which quickly became one of the world's top research institutions. He supported the creation of the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, now known as Rockefeller University. These weren't temporary donations, they were long-term investments in knowledge and progress. He also developed a scientific approach to philanthropy. He hired experts to study problems before offering solutions. He believed in data, planning, and measurable results, even in charity. This method of giving became a model for future philanthropists. Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, and many others have followed the same path. They see Rockefeller not just as a businessman, but as the founder of modern philanthropy. Still, not everyone admired him. Some critics said his donations were attempts to repair his reputation. Others argued that no one person should ever have that much money or that much influence. But Rockefeller didn't seek public approval. He rarely gave interviews and stayed mostly out of the spotlight. He believed that the impact of his work would speak for itself. Even in retirement, he lived with simplicity. He spent time with his family, played golf, and read the Bible daily. He was often seen handing out coins to children or talking quietly with friends. In his final years, Rockefeller enjoyed peaceful days at his estate in Pocantico Hills, New York. He died in 1937 at the age of 97. By then, he had given away more than $500 million, an almost unimaginable sum at the time. His life was a paradox. He was both feared and admired, criticized and celebrated. He had built an empire, reshaped capitalism, and changed how people thought about giving. But through it all, one thing remained clear. John D. Rockefeller never forgot where he came from, or the habits that got him there. The boy who counted every penny became the man who controlled an industry. After the breakup of Standard Oil and the shift into philanthropy, Rockefeller's name began to change in the public imagination. He was no longer seen only as a cold, calculating tycoon. Slowly, he was becoming something else, a symbol of legacy, power, and purpose. The newspapers that once called him Ruthless began reporting on his charitable work. Reporters wrote about the hospitals, universities, and churches that bore his name. Communities that had once feared the Standard Oil monopoly now welcomed the institutions his wealth had helped create. But Rockefeller's relationship with the public was always complicated. He was a private man in an increasingly public world. He rarely gave speeches or interviews and avoided attention whenever possible. Despite being one of the richest people in human history, he lived with a surprising sense of restraint. His homes were large but not excessive, and his personal spending was limited. He dressed modestly, often in plain suits, and lived by strict moral codes instilled by his deeply religious mother. He began each day with Bible reading and prayer. He believed wealth came with responsibility, not indulgence. His generosity grew as he aged, but so did the planning behind it. He created a system to make giving more efficient and impactful. He formed the Rockefeller Foundation in 1913, one of the first institutions of its kind. It was not just a donation center, it was an engine for solving problems. The foundation focused on long-term solutions. It addressed global health, education, and scientific research. One of its earliest and most successful programs was a campaign to eliminate hookworm in the American South. This disease had silently infected millions of poor farmers and workers, weakening communities and limiting growth. Rockefeller's funding paid for research, public health campaigns, and medical treatment. It was one of the first large-scale efforts to use science to solve a social issue. The results were powerful. Health improved, productivity rose, and awareness spread. The campaign became a model for future health interventions. Later, the Rockefeller Foundation played a crucial role in funding medical schools across the United States. It supported research that led to breakthroughs in vaccines and treatments. It also helped establish public health as a profession and a global responsibility. Rockefeller understood that big problems needed structured approaches. He surrounded himself with experts, advisors, and scientists. He asked hard questions and demanded measurable results. He applied the same focus and discipline to charity that he had once used in business. Nothing was wasted, nothing left to chance. He believed every dollar should have a purpose and every gift a long-term impact. But even as his influence grew in new directions, some still viewed his past with suspicion. Critics said no amount of giving could erase the damage done by monopolistic tactics. They claimed his empire had come at the cost of small businesses, fair markets, and economic diversity. These critics raised a larger question: can a man be both a builder and a destroyer? Can good deeds balance out aggressive ambition? Rockefeller himself never tried to answer those questions directly. He believed his life spoke for itself, that he had built something lasting, and then used his fortune to lift others. His supporters said he was a man ahead of his time, a capitalist who turned into a humanitarian. As America entered the 20th century, Rockefeller's influence was everywhere. His family name appeared on institutions, foundations, buildings, and scholarships. And yet, he remained distant, living quietly into old age. He enjoyed simple routines, gardening, walking, spending time with his grandchildren. He lived to be 97, an age few reached in that era. He witnessed the rise of automobiles, airplanes, and radios, technologies fueled in part by the oil industry he had helped create. When he passed away in 1937, his funeral was private and understated. But the world took notice. Newspapers around the globe reflected on his life, not just as a businessman, but as a symbol of an era. Some praised him as a genius who reshaped the world. Others warned about the dangers of concentrated power and wealth. But everyone agreed John D. Rockefeller had left a mark that would not fade. He changed how people viewed business, wealth, and social responsibility. He proved that vision, discipline, and patience could build empires. And he showed that those same tools could be used to heal and uplift. The fortune he built was not just spent, it was invested into the world, into science, medicine, education, and human potential. And his story became a blueprint, for better or worse, for generations of leaders and dreamers to follow. As Rockefeller's legacy expanded through the 20th century, his name became a symbol of both extraordinary wealth and complex morality. He had reshaped capitalism, redefined philanthropy, and left behind institutions that would outlive him by generations. But as the decades passed, new voices began to question not just what he had done, but what it all meant. The sheer size of his fortune still staggered historians and economists. Even today, when adjusted for inflation, John D. Rockefeller is often considered the richest individual in modern history. Some estimates put his net worth at over $400 billion in today's money. That scale of wealth is difficult to even imagine. It gave him influence over markets, governments, and the very shape of American life. Yet Rockefeller always insisted he wasn't driven by greed. He said he loved order, discipline, and the satisfaction of doing things well. Money, to him, was a byproduct of effectiveness, not the goal itself. And when he finally stepped away from business, he proved it by giving away vast portions of what he had built. But this raises a deep and lasting question. Can the results justify the methods? Can incredible success excuse ruthless strategies? Rockefeller's defenders argue that he brought stability to an unstable industry. They say he lowered prices, improved efficiency, and created thousands of jobs. They credit him with the rise of modern industrial America. Without Rockefeller, the oil industry may have stayed a chaotic mess of short-lived companies and unreliable products. Critics, however, see it differently. They say he crushed competition, manipulated markets, and bent the rules to his advantage. They see his monopoly as a threat to democracy, not just the economy. Both views contain some truth. Rockefeller's actions reflected a world that was changing rapidly, where rules had not yet caught up with innovation. He moved ahead of regulation, often faster than lawmakers could respond. The Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890, the very law used to break up Standard Oil, was created in part because of the example he set. He didn't just influence business, he shaped the legal system that would come after him. In many ways, Rockefeller's career was the test case for modern capitalism. As new generations studied his life, they saw patterns that repeated. The rise of giant tech companies, global finance, and complex supply chains all mirrored elements of what he had built. The debates around monopoly, corporate responsibility, and wealth inequality still echo the ones sparked by Standard Oil. But what made Rockefeller's story different was what he chose to do after achieving power. He did not build palaces or chase celebrity. He turned inward, toward his values, and asked what good could come from his fortune. In this way, he became more than a businessman. He became a model for how to give. The Rockefeller Foundation, the University of Chicago, the General Education Board, and the Rockefeller Institute set new standards. They were planned, not improvised, structured for long-term impact, not short-term applause. He believed that education was the key to progress, that medicine could save lives at scale, that lifting communities out of poverty was a better investment than building monuments to his own name. This wasn't just charity, it was strategic giving. Rockefeller believed deeply in measurement, structure, and the scientific method. He wanted his philanthropy to function like a business, accountable, precise, and driven by results. Many of his programs didn't just help individuals, they changed systems. They introduced data collection into public health. They transformed rural education in the American South. He created fellowships for Black educators at a time when opportunity was limited. He funded schools for girls and supported research by underrepresented scientists. While he never spoke loudly about social justice, his money quietly expanded access and inclusion. His belief in religion never faded. He saw giving as a moral duty rooted in his Baptist upbringing. He gave to churches, religious schools, and Bible programs around the world. But he also believed that faith should lead to action, that helping others was not just kind, it was required. And so his philanthropy was both spiritual and practical. He did not try to fix everything, but he tried to fix what he understood, and he made sure the people he hired understood even more. His trust in experts became one of his greatest strengths. He listened to doctors, educators, and economists, and he gave them the resources to try bold, lasting experiments. As the world moved into the 1920s and 1930s, Rockefeller became something rare, a living legend. People knew his name, but few had seen him. He remained a mystery, even as his impact became more visible. Visitors to his estate often remarked on his simplicity. He was soft-spoken, calm, and attentive. He was happiest in his garden or reading scripture with his grandchildren. He rarely spoke of his business days. He focused instead on legacy, on what would remain after he was gone. And by the end of his life, it was clear that legacy was already taking shape. He didn't just influence an industry. He shaped a nation's idea of wealth, work, and giving. And in doing so, he left behind more than money. He left a map for how to use it. As the final years of Rockefeller's life unfolded, the world around him continued to change. The Great Depression had shaken global economies, and public trust in large fortunes was under pressure again. But Rockefeller, now well into his 90s, had already witnessed the rise and fall of empires, markets, and ideologies. He didn't involve himself in politics or make loud statements. Instead, he remained quietly invested in the foundations and institutions he had built. He believed their long-term work would matter more than headlines or short-term recognition. He died on May 23, 1937, at the age of 97. At the time, he had given away more than half of his vast fortune, more than any other individual before him. His death marked the end of an era, but the beginning of a legacy that would stretch across centuries. The companies born from the breakup of Standard Oil became industry giants. Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, and others dominated global energy for decades. They continued the empire he had started with a single Cleveland refinery. But more important than his corporate offspring were the seeds of social impact he planted. The University of Chicago became a global leader in education and economics. The Rockefeller Foundation continued to fund breakthroughs in science, medicine, and agriculture. In the decades after his death, Rockefeller's model of philanthropy inspired a new generation of wealthy individuals. Andrew Carnegie, Henry Ford, and later Bill Gates and Warren Buffett all cited him as a key influence. They embraced the idea that with great wealth came even greater responsibility. Rockefeller's approach was more than generosity, it was a philosophy. He didn't believe in charity as a handout. He believed in building systems that helped people help themselves. Whether it was training teachers, improving public health, or creating research institutions, his gifts were designed to last. They weren't meant to solve a problem just once. They were meant to change how the world approached problems altogether. He also showed that business skills and ethical vision didn't have to be separate. The same planning, precision, and strategy that built Standard Oil shaped his approach to giving. He demanded accountability not only in making money, but also in giving it away. And yet, the debate around his legacy never disappeared. Was Rockefeller the architect of opportunity, or a destroyer of fair competition? Was he a man of faith and values, or simply a brilliant strategist who played the long game? Even now, historians argue both sides. They dig through letters, records, and interviews to understand who he really was. But perhaps the truth lies in accepting both pictures. Rockefeller was a product of his time, and ahead of it. He embraced the American spirit of ambition, but also helped invent the American ideal of philanthropy. He left behind oil fields and scholarships, skyscrapers and laboratories. His family continued his work. The Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the Rockefeller Center in New York, and countless programs around the world carried his name forward. But they also carried his vision, a world shaped by disciplined giving and long-term thinking. Few figures in history have had such a wide and lasting impact. He changed how industries operate, how wealth is measured, and how generosity is managed. And he did it all quietly without chasing public applause. His legacy isn't just in numbers or buildings. It's in ideas about work, success, responsibility, and what it means to leave the world better than you found it. And those ideas are still with us today. Whether you admire him, question him, or both, one thing is clear. John D. Rockefeller was not just a man who made history, he was a man who helped define it. And his story, like the institutions he created, continues to shape the future. John D. Rockefeller didn't just build a company. He created a legacy that still surrounds us today. His influence lives on in the economy, in education, in medicine, and in every modern debate about wealth and responsibility. He showed the world that money is a powerful tool, but it's what you do with it that truly defines you. He was praised and criticized, admired and feared. But through it all, he stayed true to his principles of discipline, planning, and purpose. Whether you see him as a titan of industry or a symbol of inequality, there's no denying his impact. Thank you for following this incredible story. If it made you think or helped you learn, share it with someone who loves real stories told with clarity. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful journeys through history, told in simple English, one story at a time.